Is this voice good? Is it a good level? Try to get that mic distance correct. I'm going to go ahead and jump in. First up, before I move to the next slide, I know you're probably not going to write it down, but at the bottom of the slide here is a web address. You could take, and it will appear again at the end of the presentation. You could take a picture of that with your smartphone if you wanted, and then there is a written article, which is a version of some of what we're going to go through tonight. All right, and I see some phones out, so I'll hang on a minute before I make the change on that slide. That's a bit.ly address, so it's actually shortened, so we don't have to have 75 characters you have to type in. Hang on here. Okay, great. Okay, so generally when I go to do a speech or talk about something, everybody is like, who are you? And basically kind of why do I want to hear your opinion? Thank you for the introduction. That is great. I would caveat on top of that, I also hold a professional investigator's license. So I've done, I have a background in digital forensics. I've also done, I'll say, I use the term open source intelligence or web intelligence investigations. So what that means is I've seen the seedy underbelly of the internet, and trust me, it's not pretty. I've also, in the forensic space, I've written some forensic software to map photos from your cell phones. So it actually extracts some of the hidden data, maps that, and categorizes it and things like that. From a teaching perspective, I have been teaching roughly about 3 years in higher ed. Both for previously for Ferris State out of the Big Rapids and Grand Rapids campuses, and now I'm currently with Walsh College, and we are expanding our cybersecurity program. Obviously, that is a growing field. I'm not going to go through the litmus of education. You can see that, and I'm not going to read that. One thing I will say is right now I'm actually writing my doctoral thesis, so I'm working on my doctorate in cybersecurity. My research area is identifying the source, so the source mobile phone from an image. So if you don't have the phone and we just have an image, identifying where that came from in a precise fashion. So there is some debate when all of us propeller heads, so all of us geeks get together, there's some debate on how to do that properly. I'm going to throw my opinion into the mix with hopefully a lot of good solid research that gets some attention. I have done speaking. I'm not going to go through all these at the local, state, regional, national, and at global forensics conferences. So been around, seen some stuff. I'm going to share, I'll say, my perspectives on that stuff tonight. And tomorrow is obviously, being a Star Wars fan, of course I couldn't not make note that tomorrow is the opening day for Last Jedi. But when I do classes, we'll say sometimes the material, again, when propeller heads get together, sometimes that material can be pretty dry, so we try to liven it up a little bit. So you'll see pictures tonight. I sometimes throw in memes like this to kind of lighten the mood a little bit, or at least make it a little bit more entertaining. So for tonight, what I'm going to go through is I'm going to talk about data usage at a really high level. Then I'm going to get into what I call the dirty secret of cybersecurity. You may know this. A lot of folks generally don't, especially if you're not in the industry, or as I'm saying tonight, a fellow propeller head. So this is something you'll want to understand. We're going to go through how that dirty secret applies. So for instance, in the breach landscape. So with this presentation, we said we're going to go through what seems like the unending breach after breach and stolen data after stolen data. We'll talk about some examples of that. And then we're going to focus a lot on identity theft and thinking differently about it. I've had many conversations with people, and I find that people don't always, I'll say, have the right perspective. So you may already have that perspective, and if you do, that's awesome. If you don't, I'm going to try to provide that perspective for you tonight. And then, of course, I'm going to try to wrap up with some suggestions on what I call consumer identity risk management. So, because this presentation is very much about coming to the realization that the corporations in Congress are not going to save your data. All right? So you need to start thinking progressively about how do you deal with preventing your identity from being stolen. All right, so what measures can you take? So data usage at a really high level. So when we think about that, in industry, we call that personally identifiable information. You know, us tech people, we like to have all these acronyms, right? This one is PII. So if you ever see the term PII, we're talking about private information about people, all right? That's really what that comes down to. Healthcare providers have that, right? When you go to the doctor, anytime you go to a new doctor, you got to give them all this information. You have to sign these HIPAA forms. They may share that with others, and obviously there's a lot of medical data, but there may be additional personally identifiable information involved there. Financial institutions is another one. Obviously, Equifax is a credit agency, so they're connected to all this, but you know, you may have had a mortgage or a loan that you started with one institution, it was sold off to another, so these, you know, your data moves, if you will. Obviously, hiring organizations want things like social number, et cetera, to identify you, to do background checks. These are all collection points, and all these are points of potential risk. And then, of course, we have our friends in government agencies. We have the Social Security number, which I would say we need to get rid of. We need to replace that with something else. That was created, and it had logic built into it, and anytime you do that and it stays around for too long, it becomes problematic. I would argue the social number should have already been gone, probably 10 years ago. Hopefully, we start making forward progress on that. But and then, of course, if you do pre-check with TSA, when you travel, there's known traveler numbers, things like that. Like for me, as a professional investigator, there's separate numbers that they have to track on me because they have additional things they keep a track on me with. But in general, those are a lot of, we'll say, the data set collection points and where data can move. And we're going to talk about different examples of these collection points that have been breached. All right? So try to put this in context. The other thing that I would call out that some people don't think about, so if you've ever used Amazon, all right, they collect data on your shopping habits, all right? Because you ever notice, like, they suggest, hey, here's a deal, or here's this, or here's that. They are collecting shopping and searching habits on you. That may not directly be what I would call personally identifiable information, but if that information gets taken, it can illustrate things about your behavior. All right? So, yeah.
Why is that legal?
Because it hasn't been made illegal, is really what that comes down to. So, that is not, there is nothing that says if we step back, and you won't hear me throughout this conversation say, let's put on some rose-colored glasses, I do believe their original intent in that was so that they could better market. I think there's a downside to that data collection point, and that is that we can see more into your behavior. And actually some of that data, depending upon that place that captures it, may or may not be sold. Because I don't want to sidetrack too much, but there are, we'll say, programs by like the NSA, et cetera, that they go out and buy this type of information in order to harvest data and use it. All right? And since it's civilly collected, there's no mandates against it. It's not outlawed at this point. The dirty secret about cybersecurity is this, and it is not, in industry we know this. And the problem is, after a breach occurs, okay, it's usually about 3 months before it's figured out that you've been breached. 3 months, all right, that's the average. Those of us in industry who know how this works, we know that average is 90 days. So now imagine that. You have somebody who is in your network, owning your infrastructure, with access to your data for 90 days. How much do you think I could get? A lot, if not all of it, okay? The retail sector is even worse, almost double. Okay, so the top one is financial, retail is next, okay? So it's not to paint a gloom picture, but these are facts. This is the world that we live in right now. Okay, so I affectionately, yes, the picture on the bottom right, I affectionately or not so affectionately call the Equifax breach a dumpster fire. It is a wholesale dumpster fire. all right? This was not a technical problem, all right? And this is where we're at with cybersecurity. I would say in industry, so for instance, when I'm teaching classes to students, what I stress is don't worry about being fancy and knowing all the sexy, really cool tech. You have to get the basics right. If you can't get the basics right, it will be a dumpster fire, okay? And this is exactly what Equifax did wrong. They did not get the basics right. I would argue, my in-industry opinion, from the CEO down, they had a culture of ineptitude if this happened. That would be my commentary. And I certainly would not be polite with them on what happened, okay? So what I tend to like to do, of course, being I'll say, so as a professional investigator, when I try to figure out what's happening and who's doing what, I like to look at a sequence of events. So we call it obviously a timeline, all right? So here's a sequence of the high level of events with the Equifax breach. So on March 8th of this year, all right, the United States Computer Emergency Response Team, US CERT, issued a warning that Apache Struts had severe vulnerabilities in it. So what is Apache Struts, right? Because again, us tech people, we have all these crazy names and things. So we'll distill that, okay? That means this. Apache Struts is a framework, all right, that you build website portals with, all right? Equifax offers their services on portals like this. So a core of their offering is created with this type of software, all right? So this is integral to their operation. So again, on March 8th, nationally it was released. I remember when this came out, we were seeing notifications that there were wholesale attacks going on across the internet targeted at Apache Struts websites. We knew it. This was not like, I mean, people were practically running in the bathroom saying, Apache, you know, we knew this in industry, so it wasn't a secret. The next day, Equifax told their internal team, you need to patch and upgrade Apache Struts within 48 hours, all right? I've had some people say, doesn't 48 hours seem long? My comment would be this, in having run operations, all right, depending on the severity and size of your operation, 48 hours could be difficult to get done within, depending upon your staffing and what you have to change. So I tend to find that as acceptable. Now, they never did the patch or upgrade. That's the problem. Basic number one, broken. They never did it. Never got done. Yep, didn't get done. So then on March 15th, their internal security team scanned to determine if there was any active vulnerabilities. That scan and that check failed to identify that they had never done the upgrade and Apache Struts was still vulnerable. That's 2 failures in a row, double failure. Hence why I call it a dumpster fire. And I'm sorry, as a CEO, as a leader, because I've been a tech leader, I wasn't a CEO, but as the leader of the technology segment, you are responsible for how things operate, period. This type of failure is on you, end of story. You did not build effective processes, but I digress. So, March 15th, they don't detect that it's still there. Down in some of the other stuff we're going to talk about, they determined that on May, actually, I'm surprised it took this long. On May 13th, they were breached. They did not know that. That went undetected. So remember, I said the dirty secret, right, in cybersecurity, about 3 months, right? So May 13th. It was on July 29th, their security team observed suspicious network traffic outbound. They shut that down. The next day, they saw more suspicious traffic, but that was on their dispute portal, and they realized, Houston, we may have a problem. Okay? Yeah, a big one, right? So then, on August 2nd, they had realized that they were in deep water, we'll say. Yeah, I was going to say something else, but I caught myself. Being in deep water, they hired legal counsel, outside legal counsel to handle that, who, if I remember correctly, they hired Mandiant. So just as we'll say a pro tip in industry. So if you're breached, all right, so if you want to try to protect the reports that are generated on that breach, you have your outside legal counsel hire the forensic investigators, because then it's covered under attorney-client privilege. That's kind of an end around. That happens a lot more today. So pro tip, they do that a lot. So Mandiant came in, they started researching. So having done forensics, I can tell you this. You can get in, within 24 hours, you're gonna have a pretty good idea of, I think this is what they've done. The problem in forensics is this, and I wanna be careful because I've worked in forensics, is forensics is about having factual information. It's not about suspicions, okay? So it is forensic science, so you don't guess. You actually go and gather data that proves it or disproves it, and then you make a determination. That takes time, because you're not flying over at 10,000 feet. You're in the weeds with a microscope, all right? And you have to sift a lot of stuff. So they went from 8.2 to 8.11. By 8.11, they realized that PII access had been determined. They realized that they had full compromise, okay? From 8.11 to 9.1, they were obviously working on how they were going to brief the board about the breach, which they then did. And then, of course, on September 7th, it went public, okay? And there was a collective gasp heard across the United States, right? The other thing to keep in mind is this did not just affect U.S. citizens. It also affected Canadians, as well as some, not full all the Canadians, but some, as well as some of the UK citizens as well that happen to be in their databases. Let's talk about another. This is just, this gentleman, Joe Sullivan, should never be allowed to work in cybersecurity again, and I certainly hope that he doesn't. This is exactly what you never, ever do. And I would say professionally and ethically, horrible, okay? Uber, if you did not see this, Uber was actually hacked in 2016, October 2016. What was stolen was names, email addresses, phone numbers. That doesn't seem like much, right? You would be surprised as a PI what I can get off of the internet with just that combination. You would be surprised. But it included driver's license numbers. That is definitely PII, okay? They were supposed to disclose this. Joe Sullivan, and I will say in his ethically compromised whatever, decided to cover that breach up, and he literally paid the people who breached them, I believe it was about $100,000, to delete that data and not talk about it. And keep in mind, okay? How do you know they did it? You don't. You just don't. And that's the rub here, big time. As well as, why are you paying in bribe? This just reeks of everything wrong. Then, the other key thing here is that Uber, under our current structure of laws, is directly liable because they never disclosed that it happened, okay? Because if you don't disclose, you're liable. That's the way the laws work, okay? So, yeah, mess. Another dumpster fire, yeah.
Is this guy in jail? What's the penalty?
I'm sorry? Is this guy in jail and what's the penalty? I don't know I don't know if he's in jail at this point. I know he no longer has a job with Uber, okay? And I don't know if they're pursuing charges on him. Let's talk about a couple more. Correct, within the last month that released. And other sources started to get information on it, and then they basically pumped it out, and it went out into the media, and that's how they got outed. So, yeah, he was definitely probably going to let this go. So now keep in mind, your data, if you used Uber, may have been compromised for a year, and you never knew it. All right? So when we talk about I'll say the mess of the landscape of breach after breach, we also have this. Breaches that you don't even know happened because somebody tried to cover it up. So let's bounce over to some other examples. So Target breach. Probably most of you in the room, at least some of you, I was personally compromised with Target because I used a credit card there during that Christmas season in 2013. Fun fact, well, not really fun, Target was not directly breached. What they did is they sent an email, a phishing email, to an executive at the air conditioning HVAC firm that provided services for Target. They compromised his computer, which then moved through that third-party vendor's network, and they had direct network access to Target, and then they infiltrated Target. We call that pivoting. Okay? So you don't go directly at Target, you go after somebody else, you compromise a smaller player, and you pivot in. All right? This is how the game is played. All right? Next up, Anthem. Anthem Healthcare. This one, I also happen to be part of Blue Cross and Blue Shield. They're underneath Anthem. So I don't remember the details on this one. This was another fun one. But if you had Blue Cross and Blue Shield back in 2013, especially here in Michigan, you may have been compromised. You should have received a notification. The last one, this one is to help illustrate. So we have retail. We talked about financial. We had Uber. Target is retail. Anthem is healthcare. Office of Personnel Management, OPM, affectionately referred to as the OPM hack. This is basically the Human Resources Division of the federal government. Anybody who applied to federal service for a job or worked within the federal agencies. Now keep in mind, I would stress, this one was so significant, all right? This was so significant that when you apply, so imagine, if you go in to work for the FBI or the CIA, or you're going for top secret or above clearance, they do some serious background checks on you. So they not only have your data, they check on your spouse, your siblings, your kids, your parents. They may have your neighbors listed. They have a whole dossier on you.
They come to your door?
They do, yeah, absolutely. They check you out. All right? All that data that got collected was potentially harvested. All right? This one was so, I'll get to you in a minute. This one was so bad that they never announced it, but imagine if you were an undercover agent for one of our federal agencies, we had people we had to pull back from undercover ops because they were outed in the breach. Okay? That's how bad this one was. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Wasn't the source of that Russia?
It gets a little muddy, but what I've seen is China. Our not so great friends in China. So now that we've gone through that, let me see how I'm doing on time. Now that we've gone through that, let's talk about what typically happens in a breach response. And when we get through this, let's think about what would you do if you're a bad guy? Because I'm going to tell you what I would do if I was a bad guy. Okay, a company is breached, let's just say. The company has to disclose that, and I have maybe on there because of Uber, right? Maybe. So let's say they do. The company is breached. They announce we've had a breach. Typically what happens, and this has happened every time that my data has been compromised, they offer you credit monitoring for about a year, right? They don't absolutely have to, but they typically, you'll see a lot of them do that because that is their approach to trying to mitigate the potential impact to you. That shows, that kind of shows, we'll say, a good effort to try to resolve that situation.
The shop that they have at the Detroit Zoo was hacked.
Okay.
You know, I saw that in the paper. I called them, and they weren't going to do anything.
Well, a lot of the ones that do this, frankly, are large. They're really large, like Anthem, like a Target, et cetera, like the OPM. They're large enough that they can fund it. Sometimes it's just a matter of they don't have the funds to pay for that for everybody that was impacted. I mean, I'm not trying to defend not helping you. I'm just saying that's kind of the hard facts of why that shakes out that way, okay?
I don't know about anybody else, but what I did, like just within the last week, and I
Yeah, we'll talk about that here in a bit. That's a good point, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So once that monitoring goes into effect, like I said, it's about a year, maybe sometimes longer. So now let's put on our bad guy hats. All right? Why do they do this? They don't do this, well, some of them may do it for the giggles. No, I mean, not the monitoring. Why do the bad guys breach and steal data? They want money, right? Well, but let's just say, let's keep it simple and say they're after money, right? So typically what they're going to do with your data is they're going to monetize that. They're either going to sell it to somebody else who's going to try to monetize it. And by monetizing it, I mean I take your information and then I create other credit cards in your name, or I create government-issued IDs so I can go do other things. That's how I monetize it. Now, why would I go out and try to monetize it if I know that they just offered you a year of monitoring? Because why would I go through all that effort if I know you're going to get notified immediately and you're going to shut down and it's a waste of my time? If I'm a bad guy, I'm going to sit on it for a year. I'm going to wait until that year of free monitoring goes away. And if you don't re-up that, then I'm going to hit it. Okay? And these individuals are clever. They may be patient. So don't assume if it doesn't happen in the first year, it will never happen. That's kind of my point. So this is kind of, if we think about this process and how these things, play out. Now, this process does not include ransomware with Bitcoin. That's not, we're talking about, personally identifiable information to try to create new accounts. So now that if we've thought that way, that, okay, what if the bad guys do that? We need to specifically think about, and this is where I've had conversations with folks who say, well, I get notified every time there's a charge on my credit card, so I know when somebody's, trying to rip me off. That is one aspect, potentially, of what's happening. That's not the only aspect. As I said, another piece of it is, what if they turn around and I go and I create or try to get a driver's license in Ohio with your identity? If I get that, if I can actually pull that off, now I can go get payday loans and advances, which, by the way, don't usually always show up in credit monitoring. I can go try to create brand new credit cards. I can go try to get a mortgage on a house. I can go you can rack up tens of thousands, if not $100,000 on accounts that you do not know exist. All right? And those are the ones that should concern you most, because what happens is when those build up, they don't pay on them, and then they go into default. And then what happens is you get onslaughted by financial organizations who are saying, we want our money. You defaulted on these accounts. All right? And then you go, I never made these accounts. Okay?
How would you know if somebody opened or got a driver's license?
We'll get into that. We'll get into that. So what I'm suggesting is this. Anybody that I have talked to, or if you've read, anybody who has been subjected to identity theft, the basic commentary is, when you finally find out how bad it is, it's soul-crushing. And then you have to and it takes a year or two of effort consistently to try to make it stop and deal with all these creditors that you never did business with. All right? So, my suggestion is this. Yeah?
Sorry. Don't they have to prove you owe them that money by showing you a signed piece of paper?
I think that's ultimately what the arena that it gets into. What I would say is the fundamental problem, and this isn't, I don't think this is going to get fixed overnight. The fundamental problem is this. We have financial institutions that are rewarded for giving out credit. That's how they make money. They are not, in my opinion, doing an adequate job to validate the identity of the people they're getting money to. The issue is not ours. The issue is the financial institutions giving credit. All right? The problem is that does not look like it's going to change for the foreseeable future. So what I'm saying is, let's leverage tools to try to avoid it getting to the soul-crushing point, all right? So instead of waiting and because they're going to argue with you in collections about how you owe them money, and you're going to have to expend a large amount of time to prove that with them. So what I'm suggesting is this: setting up monitoring and taking precautionary steps on a regular basis, all right, that help prevent it from getting to overload, all right? And we're going to get into the details of that. So before I move into that, has anybody ever gotten or had their credit card locked and then they called you and say, we see a charge in like Tokyo? Has anybody ever had? Yeah, because I have, all right? That, if you don't realize it, that's not people watching transactions. They have programs that do that, all right? So think of it along the lines of like machine learning or artificial intelligence. There's smaller versions of that run within financial sectors today. That they basically look for anomalies, all right? So if you've never been to a particular place, or let's say you do a transaction here in Detroit and 20 minutes later one pops up in San Diego, not physically possible, right? So that's going to throw a red flag. So what I'm suggesting is let's use monitoring services who use stuff like that to our advantage. All right? I'm going to sideline here for a minute because this is an important conversation that comes into this larger picture. And that is this. You should not be using the same username and password for all your accounts. I know all of us propeller heads tell you that. But I can tell you, a lot of you are still doing it. So, in fact, we know that it's happening, all right? So here's what I would say. I got it. Trust me. I have probably 30 usernames and passwords. Can I remember all those? No. I have to manage those because I have high-level access to different things. So, I got it. It's something that I have to live with. So I don't expect you to have that many. What I would recommend is this. Have different passwords, okay, for different services, if that makes sense. All right? So if you have Facebook, if you have Instagram, Twitter, okay, maybe you use certain usernames and passwords on that, but for your credit cards and for your bank account and things like that, you should have a different username and a different password, because I can tell you that when the hackers get your username and password, if that's harvested from a breach, they're going to go out and try to hit any other account they can find on you. And it's actually not that hard to figure out what social medias that you have, accounts. It's actually not that hard. And they're going to test that username and password, and they're going to continue to try to get into more accounts. Yeah?
Am I correct when I say that the most important property of a password is not all the fancy symbols you use, but its length? A 20-character thing isn't going to be regular.
For the most part, yes. I would say I would do uppercase, lowercase. I know you hear us say that, some numbers. The more complexity that you add, the better, but yes. So look at it this way. Like, okay, so we teach, for forensics, we may have to, when we're examining something, we may have to break into a file that, the court has ordered, you need to break into this file. So this is the way password breaks kind of work. You can usually break a password, worst case scenario, probably 10 or less that can be hours to within a week, okay? As soon as you pass 15, okay, and you push 20, you're talking months or years to break that, okay? So yes, length has a big impact on the ability to breach that. That's guess it. The easier way for them to do that is if they go to wherever you have that account and they actually harvest it, okay? But yes, generally that is correct. The longer the better. And I would say longer being, think of phrases. Don't think of randomized characters, think of phrases, all right? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, what's that? Yeah, absolutely, sure. So, okay. So as we talk about passwords, so I said, let's see here, banking, different from social media. If the service offers two-factor authentication, also called 2FA, use that. What is that? If you're not familiar with 2FA, so two-factor authentication is this. You have to have a username, you have to have a password, and then typically you'll give them like your cell phone number, all right, for your mobile phone. What happens is then when you log in, they send you a PIN code, okay? They text it to you, and then you have to enter the PIN code to finally get into the account. It makes it more difficult for somebody to breach you and get into that account. I strongly recommend any service that offers that, use it. All right? Now here's the plus side of that. If somebody actually does get your username and password and tries to log in, you'll get a text message. And if you didn't try, you know somebody's trying to get in your account. Okay? So use them if you can. Lastly, social media. I'm not going to dig in real deep here. Here's the thing. I'm going to criticize some of my fellow cybersecurity professionals. So obviously being a professor, I speak a lot. I've been at a lot of events. So you tend to have more of a public face. I frequently get LinkedIn requests and Facebook requests from fake accounts. And I know they're fake because I told you I'm a PI. I know how to spot these things. All right? And I look at it and go, 5 of the people I know that work in cybersecurity have already accepted their request. Okay? And I'll say, when you have a very nice looking man or woman who sends, in the picture and send it to the opposite gender, people tend to go click yes. So just because it's a nice picture doesn't mean that's really who it is, okay? So, and if it says Santa Claus, it might not be Santa Claus, right? So, but the other thing is, if you use Facebook, especially Facebook Messenger, there is a whole process now that erupts where what they're doing is they send you a link. Hey, check out this funny cat video. And then you watch it and it hijacks your account. And on your mobile device, that's very dangerous because you can't really see what it's linked to, etc. So if you don't know the person, obviously don't click on the link. I have actually had relatives where their accounts have been compromised and I'm getting clickbait through their accounts. I know. I'm looking at it going, that's clickbait. Hey, Bobby, your account's been compromised. You might want to check it out. Okay? So the other thing is a lot of folks say, hey, I've locked down Facebook. Nobody can see anything. The short answer is that's not always true. A lot of people think they have appropriately locked down their Facebook account. I would say you need to double check that. Have somebody that you don't know or that's not connected to you on Facebook yet, try to see what they can see on your account. A lot of people think they lock it correctly and they don't. The other thing I would recommend is avoid surveys. Those are great ways for people to harvest data on you. No matter, I generally don't, especially surveys that are suggested or forwarded on like Facebook, etc. I don't touch them. They're the plague to me. Don't touch them. All right, so before I get into credit and debit card usage, I'll get into gas purchases in a minute because this is part of this discussion. On the left is a normal gas pump card reader. On the right is a skimmer. All right? It's kind of hard to tell with the projector. This is actually longer, and it has an additional bump out. If you don't, and I am telling you that when you go to purchase gas, you need to look. Skimmers are more common than they used to be. Even if it's one that I've already used. Every time I walk up, I look. All right, so checking equipment. One of the things, even if you do not suspect a skimmer, you should always cover your hands. This is a shot from a hidden camera, a pinhole camera, set up to harvest pins. That's what they see. I'm right-handed. So if you put your left hand over your right hand to cover it and then you type it in, it obscures their ability to get your pin. I do that every time I use an ATM. Okay? Now, here's another thought. If you want more information, there is a gentleman called Brian Krebs. He is an investigative reporter in the cybersecurity space, and he has a lot of pictures and recommendations on skimmers. All right? He actually has videos you can watch if you want. He did some stories that in Mexico, there are cases of Eastern European gangs bribing the Mexican citizens that are ATM techs to allow them to install Bluetooth equipment within the ATM that sets up a Bluetooth wireless network called Free to Move, and then it just siphons off your PIN code and your card read right out of the ATM's original equipment. So hence, when you travel, I would say especially out of country, you need to think very, very highly about getting harvested. Now, for the Christmas season, we tend to buy more things online. If you are unfamiliar with it, there are virtual credit cards. Many of the different credit card agencies or institutions do offer them. So what is that? You have your credit card. They allow you to get a random credit card that is tied to yours, and you can use that to buy online. That way, if it gets harvested, you can just turn it off, and it never hits your original credit card. You can also set up a dollar amount. All right? So let's say I'm going to buy something. It's going to be $80. There's $10 shipping. It's $90. I'm going to set it up for a $120 limit, and then if it's actually a scam website, they might get me for $120 and we're done. All right? Very powerful tool in online buying if your credit card company offers that. So, monitoring. Let's talk about monitoring. Another example of a skimmer. That is a skimmer of an Ingenco. Key thing on this one is it's a little fatter in spots. In the red illustrates that. It's fatter on the top, it's fatter on the right, and there's a bigger gap on the left. Again, normally when you, don't rip apart people's equipment. Not recommending that, but sometimes moving it, if it seems really loose, or it seems odd, it might be an indication. Keep in mind, these types of skimmers and others have been spotted in Walgreens and Walmart around the nation. So it's not the small people either that are getting hit with this. All right, so credit monitoring. Everybody knows about credit card monitoring, right? What we particularly want on credit monitoring is new credit card and account creation. You want a service that offers that. I'm not going to give you an endorsement of a particular service. You can go on Google, you can search this, and I would recommend you look at user reviews. All right? Obviously, like LifeLock is one of them. I'm not endorsing them. That's simply an example. All right? You also want one that offers identity monitoring. These are the ones that if another, like a government-issued ID or something pops up somewhere, if they offer that monitoring, they will alert you. That would be another good service to have. And then, of course, if you do have charge monitoring on your current credit cards, turn that on. I would recommend you turn on gas station alerts because normally when a fake card is created after yours is skimmed, they either go online or they go to a gas station to test it. All right? So anytime a gas station charge is put on your credit card, you want a text alert. Now keep in mind, when you go to get gas, you will also get a text alert. But that's a good thing because you know it's working. Right? Now you know it is working and it continues to work. So it's a good way to continually test it. I said online alerts. Make sure you have those. All right? Any online purchases. If your credit card offers that, have you notified. And lastly, set it at whatever amount you feel comfortable with. They often test at $1 to $2. Because of the restrictions with the cards that I use, I have one grouping at 25 because that's the lowest they'll allow, and I have another at 50. Anytime there's a charge at $25 or more on the one group and 50 or more on the other, I get a text, even when I charge. But again, I know it's working. All right? Is this work? Yes. The irony is that if you do this, and you get into the routine of it, it actually doesn't really take that much time. A couple of other things. You should be, if you are not, looking at your bank accounts on a regular basis to make sure there are no weird transactions that you did not make. All right? If you have not set up a Social Security online account, I would recommend that you do that. I am not a spring chicken. So maybe there'll be Social Security when I get to that point. But I would recommend you do that because you can set that up in an online format. Last but certainly not least, I think that we will see a significant uptick in false tax filing. All right? The downside to this is our friends at the IRS will not allow you to do monitoring on your tax filing until you have been breached. Thank you, guys. But here's the thing I would say. File early. Don't file on April 15th. If you file early, you take away their ability to try to scam you. All right? Pretty simple. We're going to bump into a little bit of personal digital equipment. So if you are using anything, be it a desktop, laptop, mobile phone, whatever, you should be updating and patching regularly. I'm sure you've heard this. I'm going to say it again. All right? It is about securing and fixing vulnerabilities as they are found. All right? The WannaCry ransomware that swept the globe in May was because a lot of people did not patch. It's that simple. Patches had been released 2 months earlier. They had not been deployed. Okay? Smartphone apps. Some people have to have the latest, greatest smartphone app as soon as it comes out. Not me. I want to make sure it's something I actually need. There's a lot of fake apps out there to harvest your data in the stores. Google and Apple try to do the best job that they can, but we have to realize that some stuff is going to slip through. All right? You should be running, and again, I'm sure you've heard this a million times, you should be running malware and antivirus on your equipment. Interestingly enough, if you go to get rid of equipment, you need to make sure the hard drives and data storage is sanitized or wiped. All right?
Is there a program you can buy for that?
There are programs that you can buy, that you can download, that will literally, you can wipe the entire hard drive. All right? And I would do, you don't necessarily have to remember this, but do 3 passes. Just remember the number 3. Anybody who can get data off of it after 3 passes is probably the NSA. And if the NSA is after you, you got bigger problems.
How do you validate that on a smartphone app?
Those I basically wait until they've been more widely adopted, and I wait until they've been out there a while. I mean, there's not a good way to do that outside of wait and see what happens. And then I would say, here's an example of a phishing email. Notice, it has, reply to such and such at Comcast.net. That would not, Bank of America would not be sending you an email from Comcast. There's some telltale signs here. The thing I would say is this, because even as a PI, I've been hired to, I'll say, track down or check on people and things. And a lot of the people that craft these emails, they make it sound great. It's an awesome thing that's going to happen for you. And they write these things to play on your emotions, to tug at your heartstrings, and get you to click on stuff. If it sounds too good to be true, sounds too good to be true, 99.9999999% of the time, it's too good to be true. I'm just leaving that little tiny there in case, just in case, yeah.
I get notice it looks like Bank of America every once in a while.
Sure.
If you send them to abuse at Bank of America.
Yeah, exactly. If you see this, yeah, that's a great point. If you see a phishing email, yeah, come in, forward it over to the abuse group at that, and then they'll take a look at it, and then they can try to intervene.
I never give out the information they ask for.
Yeah. Yeah, they want your account. So there is the link again. There is my contact info. All right? And yes, I have a LinkedIn account. You can go see me there. If you send me a connection, I might not accept it. Might not. Maybe. If it's from Santa Claus, I definitely will. Yeah.
How secure is PayPal?
In all honesty, I've used PayPal transactions. Here's what I would say. My caution with PayPal has always been this. I do not give them direct access to my bank account. The only way I would use PayPal is with a credit card. Okay? So Dave's rule number 1, never give anybody your bank account routing information or account number ever. There's some institutions, I'll give you an X percentage deduction or discount if you allow us to pull directly out of your account. I have done that once. But that was on basically a mortgage loan. Outside of that, I haven't done it, and I won't do it again. Last car loan, they're like, yeah, we can. I'm like, no, just send me a booklet. I'll mail you checks.